So Beto O'Rourke had finally announced that he was running last week, and then he announced today his numbers for the first 24 hours of fundraising for his campaign, and they came out to be a little bit eyebrow raising at the bare minimum. So, and like I said, my eyebrows were raised when I saw this, but at the same time, you're also looking at it and you're like, why is this number so high? There has to be a reason for it. There's no way the ground level support is this high for Beto O'Rourke, but we'll get into the details about that in a minute. We'll first go over what the actual numbers are. There's not a lot of them, but here's what the numbers are. So he had announced that he had raised $6.1 million in his first 24 hours of fundraising after the announcement of his campaign. That is the highest out of any 2020 Democratic primary candidate right now. Bernie Sanders was the former highest with $5.9 million raised in the first 24 hours, and that was from over 223,000 individual donations, and that was with the average being $27 per donation. Kamala Harris was the second highest, and she was the highest out of the establishment wing of the party so far, and she had raised $1.5 million on over 38,000 individual donations. So those are pretty good numbers. I mean, Kamala Harris, that was a good number to me for somebody that's from the establishment wing of the party to get $1.5 million from 38,000 individual donations. I was actually surprised by that. I was like, that shows that she's actually a formidable candidate from the establishment side of things. And I thought for sure the corporatists would just go with her and they would kind of just push her to the figurehead, but that actually has not yet fully happened. You haven't seen a unification behind Kamala Harris is a guaranteed thing. There's still Beto O'Rourke kind of seems like he's a candidate to be the establishment candidate as well. He looks like he may actually take it. You also have Joe Biden, he basically said he's running now, but still hasn't technically announced that he's running. And you got to imagine that there's definitely some establishment support behind him, especially since even though he's polling as a front runner, which the establishment will use as an encouraging thing, he won't poll as the front runner forever. Once he opens his mouth more to the general public and to the Democratic base and starts actually speaking on a debate stage, I can almost guarantee Joe Biden's numbers will go down. And the more that people actually go through his record with a fine-tooth comb, then you'll finally see Joe Biden start to lose some popularity among the base. So I think that's eventually going to happen. So I think the establishment kind of knows this as well. And the corporate side of the Democratic Party is looking to kind of push either Beto O'Rourke or Kamala Harris. I think Cory Booker and people like Amy Klobuchar and Kirsten Gillibrand are mainly just subs at this point. They're like bench players for the corporate wing. So at this point, here's some more details about what's going on, and we'll get to why it's suspicious in a minute. So when he had announced this, everybody started just fawning all over and saying, oh, $6.1 million, Beto's the real deal. He's showing how much grassroots support he has. But here's the problem with that, and this is where it gets suspicious. He didn't actually report how many individual donations he got and what the average donation was. So the problem with that is even Kamala Harris, who's a corporate part of the party for the most part, she comes off as a little bit more progressive than an Amy Klobuchar or John Delaney, but at the same time, she's still part of the establishment wing of the party. She was even in full disclosure of everything like that and said, yes, I raised $1.5 million. Here's the 38,000 individual donations I got. And you can average out the donations from there. But Beto O'Rourke did not give those numbers at all. So we have no clarity on what the actual numbers are for Beto O'Rourke. So maybe he actually got some good individual donations, but at the same time, it looks like there's a lot more heavy donations on Beto O'Rourke's side of things, and he hasn't disclosed that yet. And he won't actually have to disclose that until April if he doesn't want to. That's when the FEC would actually make him disclose that to them. So he actually has a lot of time to just ride with the $6.1 million number, even though that is probably a very misleading number, to say the least, at this point in time. So other details here, like I had said, Bernie Sanders was 223,000. 38,000 for Kamala Harris. The average number for Bernie Sanders donations was $27, And we're going to look at some polling real quick here. This is from a Morning Consult poll, and just see where Beto O'Rourke polls, see if maybe there's something we're missing here. Maybe he's polling now in the recent weeks at around, I don't know, 15%, where Bernie's been at around 25 for the most part, occasionally going up to 27. Biden's been around that range too, of around 27 to 29%. Maybe Beto O'Rourke's up there. Maybe he's all the way up at around 15% or 14% now, and that's why he has this huge groundswell of grassroots support coming in that made this $6.1 million. I almost can't even say that with a straight face, that he had grassroots support get him all the way to $6.1 million. But let's look at the poll, and maybe I'm completely wrong about this. So once again, this is from the Morning Consult poll. This came out on March 12th. That's Tuesday of last week. And Joe Biden still leading the way in this particular poll at 31%. Bernie Sanders second at 27%. Kamala Harris third at 10%. Elizabeth Warren is in fourth at 7%. And then Beto O'Rourke is right there tied with Elizabeth Warren at 7% as well. So how come Elizabeth Warren at 7% raises around $300,000 in her first 24 hours? And then all of a sudden, Beto O'Rourke now raises $6.1 million when they both poll at 7%. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then if you go and look at early primary states, so let's say early primary states such as Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, you have Joe Biden at 33%. You have Bernie Sanders at 29%. You have Kamala Harris at 9%. You have Elizabeth Warren at 7%. Then you have Beto O'Rourke at 5%. So, once again, Beto O'Rourke is at 5% early primary states, and he's at 7% in overall polling for the country. So, how does that make any sense that he would set the fundraising record and have the most grassroots support out of anybody, unless he was taking on much bigger donations and then just not disclosing that to the public now because he knows that it will probably look bad and it will ruin all of the optics of what he's trying to do? So one more look at this poll from the Morning Consult. This image is also from them, and this is favorability ratings for the candidates. So Joe Biden is at 46%, very favorable. 33% somewhat favorable. Bernie Sanders is at 34% very favorable and 41% somewhat favorable. Then you have Kamala Harris at 22% favorable and 29% unfavorable, or somewhat favorable, I mean. And just in case I said unfavorable for any of those second numbers, I mean somewhat favorable. Just wanted to clarify that now. And then you have Elizabeth Warren at 20% very favorable and 34% somewhat favorable. Beto O'Rourke then comes in fifth at 18% very favorable and 25% somewhat favorable, barely edging out Cory Booker, who is at 15% very favorable and 28% somewhat favorable. So once again, where is the favorability coming from where all of a sudden he's getting these numbers? It doesn't add up mathematically at all that Beto O'Rourke would outraise somebody like Bernie Sanders that has 34% very favorable, 41% somewhat favorable, and has never heard of at 2%. Then you have Beto O'Rourke, who is 18% very favorable, so that's 16% lower, and then 25% at somewhat favorable, which is 16% lower. And then he has a never heard of at 30%, and then a heard of but no opinion at 19%. So how in the world would he have the most grassroots support out of any candidate in the entire race? That just doesn't add up at all. So I think what you're looking at here is something along the lines of the establishment trying to rally the wagons behind a particular candidate that they think could be fruitful for them in the long run. They're trying to improve the optics now to make it seem like he has a ton of support, just like he did back in his Senate race against Ted Cruz that originally garnered him the headline. So they're thinking maybe if we push this up again and really inflate the numbers, then maybe we actually have a shot at getting this guy back into the headlines. He's already in the headlines, but back into a lot of Democratic voters view as one of the lead horses in this entire race. And I think that's definitely what you're kind of seeing happen right now. Or I'd say this, it definitely reeks of it, because you explained to me how he has those favorability numbers, and then Bernie Sanders has those favorability numbers that I just pointed at, and somehow Bernie Sanders raises $200,000 less in 24 hours than Beto O'Rourke. No, he got $6.1 million. I'm not disputing the number, but where is that from? And what kind of average donation is that coming from? Is that coming from people maxing out the donations that they can give, so that way they can blow it up as much as possible from a smaller amount of people, which I would say is very likely the case, and then they just had a bunch of donors that are from the corporate wing of the party, that support the corporate wing of the party, that wanted to see Beto O'Rourke in there because he is very centrist and very corporate friendly, even though he packages himself as more of a progressive, grassroots support, no corporate PACs type of guy. He really is a very centrist, very corporatist Democrat. So I think what you're seeing here is people just rally the horses and give him as big a donations as they possibly can to try and inflate those numbers early, so that way he seems like a front runner. Another reason that I don't think that he has this crazy grassroots support that the establishment media is currently making him out to have is because of his previous voting record that has been more and more exposed ever since he ran for Senate this past year in the midterms. This article excerpt is from David Sirota in Capitol in Maine, and this is from December of 2018. Following Beto O'Rourke's spirited run for the U.S. Senate, powerful voices in the Democratic Party establishment have touted the outgoing Texas congressman as a 2020 presidential candidate who, as the party's standard bearer, would offer a vision of America contrasting against that of the Republicans. However, a Capitol in Maine review of congressional votes shows that even as O'Rourke has represented one of the most Democratic congressional districts in the entire country, he has in many instances undermined his own party's efforts to halt the GOP agenda, frequently voting against a majority of House Democrats in support of Republican bills and Trump administration positions. David Sirota then goes on to write, amid persistently high economic inequality and a climate change crisis, O'Rourke has voted for GOP bills that his fellow Democratic lawmakers said reinforced Republicans' tax agenda, chipped away at the Affordable Care Act, weakened Wall Street regulations, boosted the fossil fuel industry, and bolstered Trump's immigration policy. Consumer, environmental, public health, and civil rights organizations have cast legislation backed by O'Rourke as aiding big banks, undermining the fight against climate change, and supporting Trump's anti-immigrant program. During the previous administration, President Barack Obama's White House issued a statement slamming two GOP bills backed by the 46-year-old Democratic legislator. So in conclusion, you can see why I'm skeptical of this number that they're just parading around like it was definitely off of all of these small individual donations. Like, he is the most progressive candidate in the race, and he has the most grassroots support, and he's such a powerful candidate now with the people because he represents them so well that they were able to just rise up and shatter Bernie Sanders' record of 5.9 million by giving him 6.1 million. And I'm not buying that yet. I am heavily skeptical that he got even close to as many individual donations as Bernie Sanders did. And I'm almost positive that he was getting a lot of big donations from a lot of Democratic Party friendly donors, even Republican friendly donors, because he was always involved in terms of getting fossil fuel money as well in Texas. I mean, I know that's a given thing in Texas, but he was getting a lot of fossil fuel money in Texas. He was, in terms of the politicians that were getting fossil fuel money, he was the only Democrat in the top 5. So that tells you all you need to know about what Beto O'Rourke is up to and why you should be very skeptical of that number that just got put out and just take it on its merit as, oh, you know what? Well, he probably got 200,000 individual donors that rose up in 24 hours as well, because that is not the case. It is more the case that powerful people behind the scenes are looking to leverage the situation and explode Beto O'Rourke onto the scene on us to try and frame him once again as the front runner or somebody that could become the front runner. And we've seen this in the past. This isn't the first time this has happened where the establishment is trying to boost a candidate like this. So anybody that's a progressive that is seen how these things play out before, you should look at that immediately and be like, yeah, it doesn't seem right that Beto O'Rourke has favorability ratings that are well below Bernie Sanders nationwide and in early voting states. And the highest that he polls at is 7%, when people like Bernie Sanders are polling at 27%, and somehow he beat Bernie Sanders' fundraising record. And Bernie Sanders is a legitimately progressive candidate that does it all through small dollar donations. So the framing that the media is trying to give us right now that, oh, Beto O'Rourke, here's a real player. He made more money off of donations in the first 24 hours than Bernie Sanders. Look how progressive he is. Look how much of a man of the people he is. That's fundamentally untrue. And that's fundamentally deceitful that they try and frame it like that, because they're literally trying to set up, oh, well, he must just have more grassroots support than Bernie Sanders does. I mean, what can we say? 6.1 million versus 5.9 million. How can you dispute that? Well, we can dispute that, and we are going to dispute it the way that we just did, by looking at the numbers and being realistic about why didn't he disclose the numbers of individual donations? Why didn't he disclose what the average donation was? Why would somebody that's always been getting fossil fuel money and has been pro-fracking in the past and tried to fast-track TPP and has done all of these votes with the GOP, why would he be the guy that has the most progressive grassroots support in the entire race for the Democratic primary? It makes no sense. It's obviously shady. And don't ever just take the media narrative as is for an establishment candidate like Beto O'Rourke, because they're going to twist it and they're going to frame it like, Beto O'Rourke, he made 6.1 million and he is just so much better than Bernie Sanders now. And, just the people, the media, we're for the people too, and the Democratic Party's for the people. That's why we have to just really support Beto O'Rourke and really just look at him as a front runner in this race. And that's what they're going to do. But I'm just letting you know ahead of time, it's a very nefarious way that they're going to do it. And they're trying to frame things in a way that's not actually true. And it drives me insane. It always drives, I think, most progressives insane, but this is the world we live in, and this is why independent media is here, to be able to debunk all this nonsense or give you a reason why Beto O'Rourke isn't actually this grassroots funded candidate that they're making him seem to be right now in the media, and that he's not actually raising $6.1 million off of small dollar donations that average around $27 off of 200,000 individual donations. He's just not. And if he was, he would have released those numbers. There's no reason for him to just not release those numbers, because let's be real here. Not only is he just polling at 7%, but if you even just go on the social media or talk to people, there are not that many people, especially in terms of people that consider themselves progressive, that even like Beto O'Rourke, let alone want to support him and give money to his campaign. So I'm skeptical all around about this entire narrative that Beto O'Rourke now has the most grassroots support out of anybody in this race, and that he is really now a front runner and a titan in this Democratic primary. He may be a titan solely because the establishment is going to give him backing like they are right now, where they're framing things in a certain way for him to be more favorable, and they're framing him as a more progressive candidate than he actually is. But we're used to that by now, and I think it's not going to work on true progressives. I don't think it's going to work on most of the Democratic base. I think most people in the Democratic base and who consider themselves progressive know who Beto O'Rourke is and what he brings to the table, and are not just going to be fooled by him raising $6.1 million in the first 24 hours of his campaign launch. It's not going to happen. The media is going to have to try and do better than that to just frame things the way that they want to frame them, to push this narrative. And we'll see what happens, but it's just annoying to say the least. Hello, everybody. If you already subscribed to the channel, then just know that I genuinely appreciate it. If you don't already subscribe to the channel, but you enjoy the content, then I would highly recommend you go down below and hit subscribe. Also hit the bell so that way you're notified every single time that I drop a new video. And there is a Venmo link in the description box below in case you ever want to make a donation to the show. We are completely reliant upon audience support at this point, so if you can, I cannot thank you enough for that as well. Thanks again, and I will be talking to everybody soon.